Welcome to the March 4th Planning Commission meeting. We'll go ahead and get started with the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice for all. Thanks, everybody. We'll go ahead and move to welcome and introductions. I'll start with myself. I am Tyler Duplosky, the chair, and then we'll go down all the way to my right. We'll move through in person, and then we'll go to Zoom.
Wayne Knight, Planning Commissioner.
Tiffany Mitchell, Planning Commissioner. Annette Stewart, Planning Commissioner.
Paul Fontenot, Planning Commissioner.
Jim Fisk, Principal Planner.
Nick Bond, Community Development Director.
Art Office, Associate Planner.
And then moving to Zoom, I see Joe.
Joe Morrison, Planning Commissioner.
Thanks, everybody. And now moving on to audience comments. Got one person in the room here tonight. If you'd like to say something, please come up to the podium and start with your name and keep it to 3 minutes, please.
I'm Tyler Dennison, living in Port Orchard. I just had a comment on the parking thing on today's docket. What's proposed is the max from the Washington State bill and not like the max allowed, and I know that Fort Townsend had changed everything to be a recommendation instead of a requirement. I was hoping for something along those lines.
We will take that into consideration. Connor, do we have anybody online who would like to comment? If you would, please raise your hand on Zoom. There are no attendees online. Okay, moving on to the approval of the January 13th Planning Commission minutes. Did everybody get a chance to review those minutes? Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the January 2025.
Second. All right, all in favor of approving the minutes as written?
Aye.
Any opposed? One abstention. Okay.
I'll abstain. I wasn't in attendance. Thank you.
All right, so 2 abstentions and approved. Thank you. Moving on to business items, we've got 5A, a discussion about parking and circulation, LR 24 Code Amendment 01, House Bill 1110. I believe that is Jim.
Thank you, Jim Fisk, Principal Planner, City of Port Orchard. The City of Port Orchard is considering amendments to Port Orchard's parking and circulation standards under POMC Chapter 20.124. This initiative was first introduced in February last month to the Planning Commission and is a proactive effort to align our city's parking regulations with evolving state legislation and planning priorities. Since our initial discussions, staff has identified Senate Bill 5184, which was provided in tonight's packet. It's currently under consideration by the Washington legislature. If enacted, this bill would limit the amount of off-street parking that cities with populations exceeding 20,000 may require for residential and or commercial developments. While Port Orchard has not yet reached this threshold, projections indicate that we will in the near future. By addressing these changes now, we ensure our regulations remain compliant with state law and align with our city's long-term planning goals. One significant update is to the electric vehicle parking requirements. In revised POMC 20.124.050, will now directly reference the Washington State Building Code, ensuring consistency with state standards while streamlining regulations for developers. This modification remains unchanged from the version presented in February. Another major revision involves minimum parking standards. In anticipation of 5184, we propose updating our parking requirements for residential and commercial uses to promote sustainable urban development. Additionally, bicycle parking requirements will be consolidated into the main parking table, making that table more user-friendly. The amendments, which are part of 5184, introduce exemptions for minimum off-street parking requirements for existing buildings undergoing change of use, including vacant buildings, residential units under 1,200 square feet, commercial spaces less than 5,000 square feet, facilities serving alcohol, childcare facilities, commercial spaces in mixed-use developments, and affordable housing, senior housing, and housing for individuals with disabilities. These exemptions aim to reduce barriers to development and support diverse housing and business opportunities. To improve clarity and efficiency, we propose consolidating downtown parking standards. POMC 20.130 has provisions for mixed-use parking will be incorporated into table 20.124.140 and POMC 20.124.135 would be repealed. Additionally, we recommend repealing POMC 20.124.090 as its provisions are redundant with POMC 20.127.330. Key pedestrian accessibility requirements will be integrated into POMC 20.127.330 to maintain walkability and address existing regulatory conflicts. These updates align with our adopted comprehensive plan's goals for sustainable development of transportation. Reducing parking minimums encourages infill development, enhances alternative transportation options, and reduces regulatory burdens on small businesses and mixed-use developments. By aligning EV parking regulations with state requirements and incorporating bicycle parking more comprehensively, we further the city of Port Orchard's comprehensive plans, goals, and policies, and the commitment to multimodal transportation. These amendments provide a balanced approach that benefit developers, residents, and city staff alike. Developers gain regulatory clarity and cost savings, while residents and visitors experience a more walkable and transit accessible city. Additionally, these changes will improve the efficiency of city operations by simplifying code administration. At this time, we request the Planning Commission's review and feedback on proposed amendments. Following your input, staff will schedule a public hearing to gather additional community feedback before forwarding final recommendation to the City Council for action as part of the broader middle housing ordinance. We look forward to your comments and suggestions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And when would you like feedback by?
The sooner the better. I would like to see those in the next 2 weeks so that we can include those in any revisions that could have to come back to the Planning Commission in April.
All right, starting with Alderman Ray.
I had a couple questions for staff. Has the staff assessed the net results of implementation of this proposed ordinance change? I'm just curious, the net result of parking in various areas of the city.
Well, I think it's important to note that the code as written in these amendments, it's not parking maximum. This is the minimum required by the city. So the burden goes on the developer, whoever's developing the property, that they ensure that they have adequate parking for their development. Instead of the city mandating some arbitrary number that they think will resolve that. So in many instances, for apartment complexes and that sort of thing, we've processed parking variances to reduce the amount of parking, and that's based on parking study. So when developers are developing property, they're aware of what their needs are to serve their development, and can do that through parking studies.
Well, totally aware of that. I'm looking at the net overall results. I'll give you a good example. You know, I come downtown for a variety of great big parties. You know, we have the graduation when kids get out of high school. We have the holiday parties. We have the car shows, and you can't find a place to park within half a mile. So I'm just curious if this would exacerbate parking availability for the city to have functions in its downtown core, and how does this make it more walkable? I'm failing to see how it makes things more walkable, where and how these parking adjustments will make things more walkable. The city is not a very walkable city. We're very spread out, from way over here to way over there to way over the corner woods. And it's not a walkable city. And I think the zones can be walkable for sure, but I'm kind of think that overall breach is subject as to how and where this gets more walkable. I'm not seeing it. I'm just curious what you mean by that.
Well, I'll let Jim think about the walkability question, but in terms of analysis, you know, there's very little development occurring downtown, so downtown is sort of its own thing, and we don't plan for parking for events downtown. We plan for day-to-day usage, and if you look at the inventory of available parking downtown, on any given day, there is ample parking throughout the entire downtown. When you have a special event, that might be a different story. I think what the county is doing with their courthouse project and adding public lots up the hill may provide opportunity for people to be shuttled from the county, the new parking lots at the county courthouse on the weekend down to downtown. Most of those events don't occur during peak traffic periods. But in all other parts of the city, the market is going to provide the amount of parking that is needed to lease an apartment building, to build a house. We will look probably at our public works standards in terms of when on-street parking is required versus optional, because
That's kind of what I was looking at.
Yeah.
That's the one that's.
public parking is really, you know, it's a public good. And if we allow people to put in roads that don't have on-street parking and have a lesser standard, that may create problems in some of these neighborhoods. But as long as there's parking at least on one side and possibly required on both sides, that's a different story. And so we have talked about, right now, our local access standard and the public works standards for the city say the parking lane is an optional, feature. And so, we may want to look at making that required on the side of the street where development is occurring. And where development occurs on both sides of the street, you would have parking on both sides of the road. And then the neighborhood could share that parking, which will allow for a reduction on the individual lots.
And these, the proposed minimum standards would allow the staff to make those determinations so that we wouldn't have a stumbling situation in the future. I mean, how restrictive are these proposals for that scenario? Can the
The
staff-
law does not, the proposed state law does not prevent us from establishing on-street parking standards and making sure that that exists as part of the development of new roads.
Perfect, thank you.
I think it also doesn't prevent us from regulating the spacing of driveways to ensure that driveways aren't so frequent that they interrupt the availability of on-street parking even where you have the width. Obviously, if you have a continuous line of driveways, there's no place to park even if you provide the lane.
Thank you. That's great.
So as far as walkability, I'd say that, you know, off-street parking standards, they oftentimes create seas of pavement that go unused, right? And so it's really a subsidy for incentivizing single occupancy vehicles, right? And so that space is occupied by a vehicle. And if it's not, there's no other use for it. These standards, while they're the minimum required, there's nothing that would prevent somebody from providing more than that. It also frees up land for development to more commercial, more residential, things of that nature. And frankly, I don't know if you've ever walked through a parking lot and just seen how hostile that environment is. It is more about reclaiming space for people rather than cars.
Well, walk through a lot of parking lots where they have farmers markets and bazaars and weekend activities that are very helpful and handy to have. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I just don't want to see us get too negative on what parking can do for us as well as on a daily basis, but also for growth. If we're gonna have businesses grow here, we gotta plan a little bit of that too. Not everybody's gonna walk from place to place. We need to have a place to put people with money in their pockets to spend in our community and businesses. So I just wanna make sure we keep a balance and we don't get too crazy on
Sure.
one thing or the other.
You mentioned downtown specifically, and currently our standards do not require any parking for ground use.
Okay,
Right, for anything on the ground floor, there is no minimum parking requirement. Okay, so the parking we have is what exists.
that's good. Thank you for clarifying.
I also wanted to add on to what Jim said about your comments. You know, the legislature hasn't, the Senate has passed this bill and it's passed with very wide support. It still hasn't passed the House to my knowledge, and so we're sort of monitoring for any possible amendments to the law. It is possible that this thing evolves before it comes back to you, and we're really, because we're touching the apartment code right now anyway, even though we haven't hit the population threshold that triggers this requirement, it's 20,000 for population. That's probably 2 years away from us. We're proposing to bring this forward now, to just sort of get in front of this and not have to then amend our parking code again, in another 1.5 or 2 years. So, we'll be monitoring that, and if something major changes, we'll certainly, make you aware of that.
My only feedback was essentially to just thank you for the clarification as well. I mean, like Wayne, go back and forth a little bit on like how to make sure that we have enough for this. At the same time, the fact that the requirement is for on-site parking, not necessarily off-street, like that to me was the big thing. I think maybe Wayne and I come from a perspective living in a neighborhood where we technically don't have any off-street parking. So it makes it difficult when you think like, okay, how is someone supposed to come to my house if they can't like park on the street? And so I think maybe that's where part of that is coming from. That said, I actually appreciate and support what we are trying to do here, for exactly all the reasons that you mentioned. And I think that, you know, the downtown area is gonna be a different situation, but I think there are a lot of different opportunities that are coming up and options to try to make sure that nothing is limited. But like you said, developers have the opportunity to add more parking if they want to. So it's just fine from my perspective.
The only thing I would agree with both of what they were saying, that it is a balance. The nice thing from what I've read in the proposed code amendment was that it seems flexible enough. Each of our neighborhoods in our town is a little bit different. And there's enough flexibility with the definitions in there that we could adapt to the neighborhood that it would be applied to.
Yeah, so, I generally am in support of this as well. I think it's long overdue in most respects, especially seeing as how the state is doing it themselves. We want to catch up with that. In terms of parking, large parking requirements that we've had in the past, I think, a little bit different than I think other members of the planning commission do in terms of restriction. I don't see this as being restricted at all, in terms of mandating that businesses have more parking. I think if you're mandating that businesses have less parking, or at least dragging down the minimum, it gives people more flexibility for their own businesses to be able to decide what's best for them, in terms of their own, businesses. In terms of public parking, I don't see how this necessarily, would, impact it as much as I think most people would probably assume, as, these parking requirements would refer a lot to people's like private businesses. And during events, you know, farmers markets, car shows, different things like that, probably would project that a lot of businesses wouldn't allow public parking in their businesses because it's their private property. They can decide what they want to do. They can mandate parking or have a certain amount of parking stalls, but those parking stalls are still on their property, and they can shut those down if they don't want people using them. I know me living downtown, there's a couple of businesses that do have parking lots, and even on those busy days, they like put cones up and things like that. They mandate that people stay out of their lots even on the busy days. So I don't see how those parking requirements would really affect that at all. In terms of private parking, it would just allow for the smaller businesses who maybe couldn't afford bulldoze an area and put up a parking lot. It would allow them to still run their business, deciding how many parking stalls they do have. I think the important part is also, especially with the updates to the comp plan we've been doing over the past few months with regards to residential parking requirements. I think that's the important balance to strike in terms of allowing that density. So not allowing too much parking, or we can't have that density in terms of multifamily, in terms of like duplexes and triplexes, but also mandating a little bit in the sense of you don't want, developers and landlords coming in and providing substandard housing to people without parking stalls and things like that. So I think that's where the more important distinction should lie. In terms of businesses, I don't see this as most local businesses anyway would disagree with this reduction in parking. And the parking minimum, as it allows them the flexibility to decide what's best for them. In terms of downtown, as we've all said, it's kind of a different story. In terms of actually it's identified here that downtown is its own space, and especially with the buildings downtown mandating parking, it's a whole different ballgame. But in terms of other areas in Port Orchard, you know, the Bethel sub area, around Sedgwick as well. Seems to be right now more dominated by big box stores, that can afford to have a lot of land that essentially they're not using most of the time, that is essentially just blacked out most of the time. While small businesses, who would like to come in, probably locals who would wanna come in and set up businesses, they don't have the ability, they don't have the capital to be able to just take an entire set of land and just use it for free parking. So this allows them more flexibility. So, in terms of that, I think it's important to look at that. The other thing I did wanna mention was with, the bicycle, requirements that we were identifying specifically here. I think it's very important also to mention that along with these, it should probably go in coordination later on, of course, it doesn't have to do with, what we're approving now. But later on, it should follow into, more bicycle lanes on roads. It's good to have those bicycle, stalls in places, especially like stores and whatnot. But, if you're, you know, riding on the side of the road or the shoulder, or, you know, have been in the middle of the road trying to get to an area, then, you know, we wanna make sure we're providing for that as well. It can be pretty dangerous, so just something to keep in mind for the future. Thanks.
Joe, did you have anything to add on that?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
So if we could all get our comments on this to Jim. Oh, did you?
I said what I did before, I don't know, I didn't wait, sorry.
Do keep your eyes peeled for the public hearing that we do. Okay, so we'll get comments to Jim as quick as possible
Preferably within the next 2 weeks.
in the next 2 weeks. All right. And moving on to 5B, SEPA threshold levels, LR24. So Jim again.
Yeah, the city of Port Orchard is considering an amendment to Port Orchard Municipal Code 20.160, which would increase the SEPA threshold exemption for residential development from 4 dwelling units to 9. This amendment aligns with the allowances established in the Washington Administrative Code 197 of 11-800. Ensures consistency with the city's current short plat procedures, which already allows for the creation of up to 9 lots through an administrative approval process. As you know, the State Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA, requires environmental review for certain development projects. However, under state law, local jurisdictions can adopt higher categorical exemption thresholds to streamline permitting for smaller scale residential projects that are unlikely to have significant environmental impacts. Currently, the city's SEPA threshold exemption applies to development of up to 4 units. The proposed change would raise that exemption to 9 units, reducing unnecessary review processes and better aligning SEPA requirements with the city's existing land division process. This change is part of a broader effort to facilitate middle housing development and increase efficiency in our permitting system. It ensures that SEPA applies where truly necessary, while eliminating redundant environmental review for smaller scale projects that are already subject to other land use and building regulations. The proposed amendment is consistent with state law, specifically WAC 197 11-800-1C and 1D. By adopting this amendment, we're taking a balanced approach, maintaining environmental protections while streamlining the process for middle housing development. At this time, we ask the planning commission to review the proposed amendment and provide feedback. Following this discussion, staff will schedule a public hearing in the coming months in conjunction with the broader middle housing ordinance. Your input will refine the proposal before it moves forward for public comment and city council consideration. We look forward to your comments and suggestions. And again, if you can provide those comments, if you have any on this, if you can provide them in the next 2 weeks, that would be good.
Thanks, Jim. I didn't have any feedback on this, but we'll start again on my right.
Couple questions. Could you tell us right now with the 4 unit exemption, what's the acreage typically involved with that? I mean,
It has nothing to do with acreage.
because well, when you get into critical areas, wetlands, streams, and SEPA talks about runoff, you know, there's impervious surface, things like that. Acreage does matter, and that's why I'm curious if there's an acreage issue with this, because how do how do you envision dropping the SEPA review on these proposed projects in the future as they get bigger, and still protect all the critical areas we're working on right now?
Well, critical areas are subject to our critical areas ordinance in 20.162, so that's where that regulation comes from. SEPA, really is, for the lack of a better term, a safety net for where code does not capture certain impacts. But for the most part, our city code, and remember, when SEPA was created in 1970, a lot of cities didn't have codes, that were sophisticated enough to address all of these issues. And in the last 40 years, obviously, we've come a long way, and our codes do address those things. So when you talk about acreage, as far as the exemption, that really has no bearing on it. For instance, you could build a fiveplex, right, in one building on a singular lot. It's unencumbered by any critical areas or anything like that. But if it did have critical areas, obviously we would go through that process to ensure that adequate buffers and any mitigation come out of that critical areas review. But to require an environmental review on a single building that has 5 units is unnecessary.
I guess I'm curious, what triggers the environmental review for critical areas? Is it any project that disturbs land?
It's any project, for critical areas specifically, it's any project that is adjacent or has critical areas on it. So if there is a property within 300 feet, thank you, 300 feet on the property, and it's mapped as hydric soil with potential wetlands, then we require a critical areas report and have our third-party consultant to review that report as part of the permitting process.
And how accurate are the maps that you're using for that review?
They are not survey grade, but it gives us an idea of where we can expect those features. And so sometimes it may be mapped that, hey, there is a critical area or potential for a critical area. And it comes back, the report says, yeah, there's no critical area here. But we have to go through the evaluation process, side by side.
I would add too that, with regard to critical areas, if we get a comment that somebody suspects there's a critical area in proximity to a project, we're still doing a notice of application, so the public is alerted to this, agencies are alerted to this. They can say, hey, we think there's a wetland on this site and it hasn't been properly evaluated. We can then ask for that information, from the developer. The other thing about SEPA that you have to be aware of is that where we have city regulations that deal with one of the elements of the environment, we can't then through SEPA require something different, unless our code somehow totally fails to mitigate those impacts, just because, you know, if we have a code that says there's a 20-foot wetland buffer and somebody says, well, we need a 50-foot wetland buffer for that, SEPA can't be used to increase a buffer in that capacity. When I started here, we would review development applications and we use SEPA extensively because of how many parts of our code were incomplete or missing. We didn't have impact fees for transportation. We didn't have a concurrency ordinance for transportation. And so SEPA was the tool that we used to get mitigation. It is very rare that we seek mitigation through SEPA now. I can't remember the last time I even issued an MDNS that imposed a condition through SEPA. It's been a while. So we're using it less and less because our code, you know, has all of the elements of the environment covered. One area that SEPA may still get used for is noise and light impacts, because we don't have standards in our code that require noise mitigation or light mitigation. And so, like when the Chevron station went in up at Tremont near the roundabout, there were residences across the street from that, and through SEPA, we required landscaping buffers to be installed to help shadows, you know, block some of that light. And we left it up to the property owners to allow it, but we said, you know, you're required to put in these buffers unless the owner says that they don't want it. And we did that through SEPA because we don't have a standard that required specific lighting mitigation.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Director Bonner.
I don't have any specific comments, and I was gonna say that, like, with what Wayne brought up, was that just based from my understanding from our past meetings on critical areas, that I felt like that did do exactly what you were saying, where basically mitigated that kind of concern is that, you know, And and as I understood, we are talking about like, if it is just one building, we're talking about like, if someone wants to split that building currently at like 4. If they then wanted to go up to 9, then, you know, that's fine, yeah, the acreage shouldn't really play into it, so, okay, thank you.
No, good.
Paul?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Commissioner Wright asking the question and answering one of my questions as well. Yeah, I think it's with the housing requirements that we're looking to get through the population increase we're gonna be having over the next few years, I think it's good to be able to streamline this process as much as possible, especially seeing as how I would think that the situations where somebody would be increasing from 6 to 9 units would only be realistically for a few types of buildings, and it'd be pretty rare in general, so I think just having this streamline is pretty good, in terms of any problems that might arise, I think we'll bring the bridges when we get there. So yeah.
Joe?
Yeah, I'm supportive of this. I look forward to opportunities to increase middle housing in our community and ways to allow DCD to do their work more efficiently.
And as soon as possible, hopefully within 2 weeks, right, Jim? All right. 5C, accessory dwelling units, LR 24, code amendment 05 ADU. Jim?
The city of Port Orchard is considering amendments to the city's accessory dwelling unit or ADU regulations at PUMC 20.68 to ensure compliance with recently enacted state law. In 2022, the city amended its municipal code to remove the requirement that a property owner must live on site when the unit is present. Now, with the passage of House Bill 1337, additional revisions are necessary to make our local regulations consistent with state requirements. The proposed updates to PUMC 20.68 included in your materials incorporate these changes and aim to provide clear, streamlined guidance for ADU development. Under the new regulations, property owners will be allowed to build 2 ADUs per lot where single-family homes are permitted. The amendments also establish dimensional standards, setting a maximum unit size of 1,000 square feet and a maximum building height of 24 feet, unless the principal home is subject to a lower height restriction. Additionally, detached ADUs will be permitted to be built up to the lot lines and adjacent to a public alley. And certain design restrictions such as aesthetic requirements, entry door placements, and more restrictive setbacks than those applied to primary dwellings will be eliminated. Another key update is the allowance for existing structures such as detached garages to be converted into ADUs, even if they do not meet current zoning regulations or zoning requirements. This change provides more flexibility for homeowners while making efficient use of existing buildings. The proposal also updates ADU parking regulations in PUMC 20.124 to align with HB 1337, as well as Senate Bill 5184, which we previously discussed. To help make ADU development more accessible, impact fees for ADUs will be capped at 50% of those assessed on the principal building. And the city will not require public street improvements as a condition of ADU permitting. Additionally, the regulations allow ADUs to be sold separately as condominiums while preserving the city's ability to regulate their use as short-term rentals. Pardon me. While these revisions introduce greater flexibility, existing environmental protections will remain in place. ADUs will continue to be prohibited in critical areas, flood zones, and geologically hazardous locations. And all projects must comply with public health, safety, and environmental permitting requirements. We are asking the Planning Commission to review the attached amendments and provide feedback. Your input will help refine the proposal before we move forward with the public hearing as part of the Broken Bill Housing Ordinance, which is anticipated later this spring.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. Again, on my right.
There's me first.
What are you doing it?
Again, I start with the question, but I'm not as up on ADUs as I probably should be. But I have a couple of questions for the staff. When an ADU is built in on a lot that has an existing home on it, that home is served by sewer, power, water, all with one line to that house. And you're gonna put an ADU in that's gonna become a rental, perhaps. how are the utilities managed? So that the ADU actually has its own tracking and stuff, is that the cost on the developer or the owner to do that, or are the utility companies in tune with this sort of stuff? I'm just curious if this is a headache or not.
It is not currently a headache in that, the city is responsible for stormwater, water and sewer in some parts of the city, not all parts. The city's policy for water and sewer is that up to one ADU may be permitted on the same water connection and sewer connection. And they will remain on the same utility account. However, if you were to subdivide the ADU ceases to be an accessory dwelling unit, or if you were to kind of minimize it and make it its separate ownership, that will trigger the requirement for separate utilities for that unit, and then you pay the connection fees and you pay a monthly rate. But as long as everything's under the same ownership with one bill, we will allow up to one ADU to be served by utilities. But once you go to two ADUs, which when we wrote our utility allowances, our code didn't allow two ADUs, so it's something we may revisit in the future. But it certainly seems like then you're getting into a situation where, one ADU, maybe you've got an elderly or disabled family member who lives at home but has kind of independent living in an apartment. And so there's a reasonable, you may reasonably assume that it's part of the same household. Or you may even be using it for something else, storage or an office or a guest room that isn't always occupied. I think once you have two units on the lot, at least my instinct says those are almost always going to be rentals, and there's probably 3 rentals on the site. The primary house is 1 rental, and then there's 2 others. I think that puts you into a situation where you have real utility impacts, water usage, sewer generation. And so that would require the payment of connection fees for that second ADU. And we may look at that policy separately as part of our utility operations next time we do a water and sewer system plan. PSE almost always, they're putting a second meter on the ADU, and so we haven't had any issues with PSE. I don't know, I haven't heard anything with waste management in terms of refuse, whether they allow them to share garbage or have separate garbage accounts. And as far as natural gas, I haven't heard anything there. So I think our policy was trying to be encouraging of the creation of one ADU while not requiring that additional connection in separate utilities. But now that we've introduced the idea that these could be separate ownership, it kind of changes our calculus, and we're going to have to look at our utility policies in the future.
Yeah, and that's what triggered my comment right there. Thanks for the clarification, I appreciate it. You also made a comment, it's kind of written in here too, about other regulations where they're not allowed, such as critical areas and things like that. I know that the McCormick Woods HOA, we do not allow them in our HOA. I'm curious if the city should make a comment in this ordinance as well, that if local HOAs restrict it, they should be restricted rather than ignore it. But now it's blind to that kind of situation where HOA may say no. I'm just curious if that should be in there.
I think that is a civil issue. The law clearly provides an allowance for HOA restrictions on ADUs. I don't think the city should insert itself into a dispute where a homeowner may be fighting against HOA. I would not recommend that you get involved in that.
I'm not trying to get you involved, I'm just saying, if it's not allowed in the local HOA environment, that's just like it's a critical areas ordinance or buffer, it's not allowed there either. I'm just curious to alert the public that, hey, check your HOA before you build something. Since you're promoting the ADUs, not the HOA.
Is there multiple HOAs out there, or is it covered?
Right now,
by
it's
one?
all one. It's all one, yeah.
I think once you're up at the ridge, may have their own, and McCormick Meadows has their own, but
They do.
McCormick Woods and West are all one, is my
It
understanding.
includes.
But yeah, I mean, I think, again, I think that our code allows it even if the HOA doesn't, and the HOA could change their policy. I think it's better to just be silent on this matter, right? The law provides protections. State law could change. State law could decide that they're gonna preempt HOAs from doing that. That would trigger an amendment to our code in the future. It just, I don't see a reason for us to comment on it.
Okay,
And just to follow up on that, when we're processing a permit, when we get calls as planner of the week or something like that, and people ask us about specific things, but in this case, in EDU, staff always encourages them to go check their CCNRs to ensure that it's okay, but the city is not party to that. It's incumbent on the applicant to do that.
appreciate that, Rick. Thank you.
And I don't have much of a comment other than, Wayne brought up something that I hadn't even thought about, which was the connection of, like storm and wastewater and stuff, and how that's gonna be required on the second AU, and if we need to make changes to our utilities policy, you said maybe in the future, would it actually be better to do that now? Because if we're gonna get all of this in place and someone does go ahead, and we don't already have like that figured out, I just wonder.
Well, it's, first of all, it's not a land use regulation, it's a utility policy, and so that goes through a different approval process altogether. But when we adopt utility rates and capital facility charges, they're based on a study that assumes what projects we need to build over the coming 10 or 20 years and how that gets paid for based on growth projections. And so if we were to suddenly require the payment of fees for ADUs, we would need to look at our, right now we have over 100 ADUs going in at McCormick Woods. Those are connected to city sewer, but Bremerton water. But in any event, those, right now, we are not counting on that revenue. We would actually bring in more revenue than is needed to build those projects. Not accounting for all the inflation we've seen over the last few years. But anytime you make those policy changes, they really ought to be done as part of your rate study, which the rate study is usually driven by an update to your capital facilities plan on those system plans. So we do water system plans every 6 years. And so next time we do our water system plan, we can look at that policy with water as we adopt our rate study. And then the same for sewer, which I believe is an every 10-year plan. And I think both of those are coming up within a few years. Nothing about our policy prevents the ADU from being built right now, whether it's 1 or 2. It's just how many does it cost? And if council wanted to prioritize that, they could spend money on consultants to update those studies. It's something that would require a consultant to help us with.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you for the clarification.
Night, or any concerns or questions?
I have a question. So if you have, so you build one ADU and then you want to build another, is there gonna be any kind of, like, people have to come down and say, well, I have an ADU in this corner and I'm gonna put one in this corner? Or is it just gonna be like a hodgepodge of stuff in your backyard, If you looked at it from an aerial view, would it look like a mess? Or is there gonna be some sort of, I don't know, kind of, I mean, I can see, I like the idea, but I can see this not looking nice in some places. Especially when you talk about the detached garages and up to the property line in an alley. I'm just wondering, is there any regulation for that?
There is not, and we are no longer, I believe we are prohibited. We had standards that said that you had to match the house. I don't even think we can do that anymore under state law. And so, yes, there's the potential that you could end up with a hodgepodge of architectural styles and paint colors and whatnot. But, I think most people, it is not cheap to build an ADU. It is, I'm working with an architect, hopefully to build one at my house right now with a garage over and an ADU above it. And I'm being told it's probably pushing $300,000 to build that. So it's, I think anybody who puts that kind of money into it is not going to make it look like a shanty, and so hopefully it will turn out. But there's always that possibility, and I will let you know, the legislature is considering a bill right now that would allow people to use RVs as ADUs, and every lot in the state can have an RV with somebody living in it on their property. And so that is something that our lobbyist and KWC is really pushing back on. The legislature saying we do not want people living in RVs in every backyard on every lot in the state, but there are legislators pushing that right now.
And then going to the utilities, so if you're on a septic tank, is that gonna be fine if you want to put 2 out there? If
Well-
your septic tank can hold it.
Yeah, I think there's a number of issues there. Number one, if you're within 200 feet of sewer, you're required to connect to sewer anytime you do development. So if you don't have sewer, yes, you can do a septic tank, but then it has to be enlarged, it has to meet Department of Health standards. And so there's a whole separate set of issues you have to go through to build an ADU on septic. And in most cases, there aren't a lot of huge lots that have room for septic expansion. Yeah, that's, I think 200 feet is our current policy for when you are required to connect whenever there's a development activity.
And then just one other question, it says that the city maintains authority to regulate their use of short-term rentals. You talking about Airbnbs? And how do you regulate those? What does that mean?
We currently do not regulate that.
Okay.
But, the cities could still regulate it if it chose to.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so, given, the opportunity to be able to listen to all the other commissioners' comments, in terms of me, I do live in an ADU, a rental plot or an ADU, in terms of, utilities, for the rest of that. From my experience, Puget Sound Energy is pretty good at making sure they get paid, for electricity that's used. And so they almost always mandate on their ADUs that they're gonna have a separate, power box to regulate exactly how much power is taken out. And in terms of, sewer lines and fixing, that's a city provided, element that's really between the landlord oftentimes and the tenant. Really where I see these maybe being a little bit of an issue down the line would be with, if you chose to condominiumize the property. However, given that market being so, competitive, lucrative, I don't think that people would tolerate a condominium that would be a shanty of some type. Usually people are paying off the nose for those, as they should. But in terms of, a lot of these, these amendments that we've seen throughout the comp plan, not only, tonight in terms of the ADU, but also other law or other changes that we've seen and amendments that we've seen, it seems that, it's more and more, like letting go of a lot of regulation and allowances instead of mandates, right? So we can, think up and down the wall, all the different ways that, somebody could theoretically build up, their ADUs would theoretically build up this, that, and the other. But they're more just allowances, I think, and just allowing a homeowner to do what they like with their homes, or at least plan them out the way they like. So I think that that's, a positive for both the tenants and the landlords. Tenants for being able to get a variety of different housing options that they want. Also addressing what we got in the comp plan, in terms of middle housing and addressing that middle housing, but also for the landlords as well, I should probably say homeowners as well. Being able to change up the property how they want without having to check in with the city at every moment. So in terms of that, I think it's a benefit for both parties. Again, the only, really, hang up I might see in the future is with condominiumizing. I still don't fully understand how that would work in terms of, the ADUs, but, again, I find that, being such a high demand, as Nick was saying, with building those ADUs, it costing so much investment, I wouldn't think that anybody would really cut corners in terms of that. Especially seeing as how they're selling it to, oftentimes people who have the money to be, particular about their housing options. So, in terms of that, I think it's positive. Joe, anything to add?
Just a quick question. How many permitted ADUs are there in Port Orchard, Nick and or Jim? Ballpark, if it's a complicated question.
I think we've permitted prior to the McCormick Village project, which includes a whole lot of ADUs. I can only think of 3 or 4 that we've permitted in the last 10 years. With that said, there are ADUs that have been in use in the city since the 50s and 60s with the Naval Shipyard, and so I know that there are houses in the older part of town that have ADUs that were were created before permitting requirements for them. And so I have no idea how many of those may exist and how many of them were legally or when they were put in.
Right, okay, but except for developments, there's not an avalanche of ADU applications out there headed to Port Orchard, so I think, so that answers my question, and I'm generally supportive. Thank you.
Item D, the 2025 comp plan amendment docket. Jim?
Sure, tonight we're providing an overview of the 2025 comprehensive plan and the docket. And this is an informational item, so no action is required at this time. However, we encourage you to review the docket in preparation for future discussions and deliberations. Each year, the city processes amendments to the comprehensive plan as required by the Growth Management Act. This process ensures that the comp plan remains up to date, reflects evolving community needs, regulatory changes, and infrastructure priorities. In 2024, no amendments were processed due to the city's focus on the comprehensive plan periodic update, which was adopted in December. Now that that update is complete, the annual amendment process resumes for 2025 with the amendments outlined in the materials. The document was compiled by the Director of Community Development based on an evaluation of need, urgency, and appropriateness, as well as staff and budget resources available to support the public review process. The recommended document was to be presented to the City Council on February 25th for consideration. But due to last week's power outage and the council meeting cancellation, the council will now consider it at the March 11th meeting. So your staff report indicates that it was reviewed. Obviously, that couldn't happen. So later this year, the Planning Commission will have an opportunity to review the proposed amendments in detail and provide a recommendation to the City Council. At that time, we will go through each amendment, discuss its potential impacts, and consider any necessary refinements. I should note that one of the amendments listed on the docket currently is the whole avenue rezone. I've had conversation with the applicant, and it appears that he will be withdrawing that comp plan amendment because it really needs to go through the site-specific rezone process and does not need to be considered by the City Council with the change to the land use designation of the comp plan. So after the Planning Commission completes its review, the amendments will be forwarded to the City Council for final consideration and action. Again, tonight's presentation is simply to introduce the docket to you and ensure that you are aware of what's ahead. We encourage you to review the materials and begin considering questions or comments you might have. Staff will schedule a future meeting for in-depth discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. So it sounds like mostly informational. Anybody have any questions?
I have a request on the list of dockets and the document you gave us. Can you give hot links directly to those documents? So we don't have to sift back and forth and through it. So when I want to look back at the Southwest Oak Cliff Industrial Properties redesignation, can I get a click to go right to where that is?
I think what we can do is set up a web page on the city's website and have each one of those once the document is
That's once it's ready.
considered by the council, then we can make those all the documents publicly.
Okay, thank you.
On to Nick for the director's report.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things to announce, and the last two are more exciting than the first two. First, I wanted to report that our comprehensive plan, it was not appealed. We had a 6-day appeal period, and we got through that without anyone having filed an appeal. And it is also in line for Puget Sound Regional Council certification. The staff recommended that it be certified, and so on Thursday, the Land Use Policy Board at PSRC will be voting to recommend it to the full board for approval, and by the end of this month, we should have a certified plan that will carry us for another 10 years. Likewise, Commerce reviewed the plan is good, they still are waiting for the development regulation update, which we have rolled into this middle housing work, and so by June, we should be in the clear in terms of having satisfied the Department of Commerce. Next, I wanted to report on our pre-approved ADU project. I'm going to share my screen here. So I've updated our city website. I have a little bit more information on this project, but we, through Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council, we jointly with Paulsboro, Bainbridge Island, Bremerton, and the county have funded the creation of pre-approved ADU plans, which would be available to anyone in the county to use free of charge. They would just have to come pay for a permit that covers their inspection and site plan review, and they can basically put one of these anywhere in the city. And so I expect that by April, we should have approved plans ready for use. Hopefully the beginning of April, but depending on whether there are any final corrections to the plans, it could take a few extra weeks. In any event, you go to our pre-approved ADU website, which is linked on the DCD homepage on the left-hand column here. There are currently 4 plans that are nearing readiness, with 2 more to be developed over the next several months. So with each of these, you can click on the unit and it will take you to a page that has a link to the floor plan. And this is not the architectural plan, this is just a promotional floor plan showing you what the layout is for each of the units. There are four different units of varying size. Each one of these, or some of these have varying roof lines, so you can get a 512, a 612, or an 812 pitch roof. There are also gable and hip variations for some of the designs, and so with each of these, you have a little bit of ability to customize how architecturally it looks, and then of course you can pick any color and type of siding that you want, provided that it meets all applicable building codes. And so all of these plans are now online with a floor plan, and then there's photos showing each of the different elevations and how this can be configured. So there's this is the 480 square foot unit with a hip roof, and then there's two gable examples, one that has a projected porch and one that is just a very simple gable design. You can look at all of the variations. This is an 800 square foot ADU, and again, you get the floor plan here and look at the varying architectural elevations. And so hopefully people that are using these are going to make them kind of fit in with their existing structures. And we tried to, when we did the architectural selection process for who got hired, we really looked at compatibility with Kitsap's architecture. We didn't want some architect from the Southwest bringing us a bunch of stucco buildings. So anyway, I'm really excited about the project, and I'm hopeful that in April, the public will be able to submit a simple form saying, I want to do this plan at this address. We will send them the plans that they can then submit. I think it's going to be a $250 plan review fee for the site plan to make sure that you meet your setbacks and then you lay things out properly and there's adequate separation between buildings. And then you will pay the actual permit fee when you pick up the permit to go to construction, which is based on square footage and construction cost estimate. So it'll be a few $1,000s, and that covers the 8 or 20, depending on how many inspections you failed, trips out for our inspectors to visit the site. And you can, you can get one of these built without having to ever hire an architect, as long as you don't have a site that has big areas or steep slopes that makes it challenging to put one of these in. Any questions?
High commendation, that's great, honestly. Have you talked to any builders yet about, one thing you can do when you give these plans to people, say, here's a list of builders interested in doing these things.
Well,
we're curious if you have thought about that.
Yeah, we have, and we're gonna be, we've talked to the home builders about the program, and they're going to have access to this information. We're gonna go give a presentation to them here in, just as soon as we're at launch. I think we're meeting Friday to go over all of our promotional and marketing materials. And so once those things are totally ready to go and polished, we'll be reaching out to the Home Builders Association and giving them more detail. So the second thing, because Annette brought this up 5 minutes before our meeting, I put together this entire PowerPoint presentation for her.
Thank you.
So the McCormick Village area in Port Orchard, you had asked about what the status was, and I think you were interested in the commercial portion of it, but I actually had recently given a presentation to the Home Builders Association on the project, on the middle housing that's being provided, as well as some of the innovative tools that we're using. And so I'm just going to go ahead and give you this presentation. I cut out some slides that are maybe outside of the Planning Commission's area of interest. But this is an early concept in the McCormick Village. This is the eastern half of the site looking from the north to the south. See my slides, there we go. This is about a 20-acre site, but it's 21 acres. It's about 18 acres residential, 3.7 acres commercial, and 1 acre of wetland that's set aside to be undisturbed. We have a total proposal right now of 359 units, though only the first half of this has been permitted as a subdivision. The second half is still in review, and so this number could change. It comes out to about 20 units per acre, but the nice thing is it's middle housing. It's not garden apartments or some higher density building type. It's something that we don't have a lot of in the marketplace right now. And it's part of McCormick Woods, which is 4,500 housing units, give or take, in total per the original master plan for McCormick Village, or from McCormick Woods West and North. So we entered into a development agreement with McCormick Communities to provide this. It was a priority of council to actually see some commercial development from McCormick Communities in line with the original plan. We created a pedestrian-oriented concept plan that was incorporated into our comprehensive plan, and it is both park-oriented, but also the neighborhood. We wanted it really to kind of flow into the commercial area. And it includes middle housing, small detached homes, like I think 1,800 square feet for the home, with a carriage house that has the garage and the apartment above it behind the unit. And so, you're getting 2 units per lot. There are 4 plexes, 6 plexes, and then they had some Paseo homes as kind of a cottage housing concept originally in the design. I think that has been chopped for now, but it could come back in the western half of the project in the future. The other thing that was new for Port Orchard and really an innovative thing that hasn't been done a lot in the US or in Washington is that it relies on shared streets and what we call winter streets. And so we created an overlay district to kind of make all these building types happen. We specified what building types are allowed, and then we created street standards applicable to the development that allowed for these very narrow streets that would be shared by pedestrians and cars with a very low speed limit.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah,
Do you think that part would be nixed now because of what's going on downtown
what do you mean?
with the cruise? How they don't wanna have cars, pedestrian mixed together? And I mean, I don't know the whole thing, I don't know the story, I have nothing to do with that.
I think that
But-
events are different than this concept because an event, I mean, we all saw what happened in New Orleans back in January, and I think that when you have a special event with a huge crowd of people, that's different than when you have people that are not constantly in an area that's very low traffic for cars and people. It's not a target that somebody is likely to seek out, but it did, I gave this presentation to home builders like 3 days after that happened, and I said, this is really poor timing, for talking about this idea, but it is something that's widely used, and when you have events and large gatherings, you wanna block these places off. You don't want them open to traffic for that type of activity. So, we had a road layout, there's one main traditional road that goes through the site, that's Road A, where you can see the cross sections marked. Then there's a commercial looner, which is Road C. There's a residential looner, which is, residential looner is C, the commercial looner is B over here on the right-hand side. And then the whole development is served with alleys, so all the car access is actually off the alley, which means that the street on the front of the house is mainly gonna be deliveries with Amazon and maybe the post office. And people getting dropped off or picked up, and it's gonna be people who use those as a primary pedestrian thoroughfare. So the, oh man, I've got all kinds of special effects that are slowing this thing down. So I mentioned these are known in Holland as looners. It's a Dutch term for a space to be shared by people, bicyclists, and low-speed vehicles. We also, McCormick Communities actually provided us a few examples where they had done this in residential applications in the Puget Sound. I'll show you one of those. And then I actually went to school with somebody for my master's who was a planner and an engineer who worked in Sweden. He's American, but he married a Swede, and he did his master's thesis on reverse. So I called him up and said, hey, send me your research. And he said, oh, I got something better. I'll send you the whole design manual for the city of Stockholm, which we ran through Google Translate, and then we're able to look at the guidelines that are used in Stockholm to kind of inform what we were doing. So this is an example of a residential looner up in Bothell. This is a small segment of street. You can see the aerial photo on the right. I think there's maybe 10 or 12 homes off of this, but this is an area where they connected 2 ends of a cul-de-sac with this shared concept. It sort of serves as a private driveway, but this one is actually a public road. And this is sort of in line with what we're doing for our residential street. I've got several examples of commercial looners, which there is a commercial looner in this project. This is one in Stockholm that's very famous. They actually do allow cars to drive through this area, but you can see that there are things like signs and seating areas in the middle of this thing that cars have to weave through in order to actually drive into these areas. This is another example in Sweden that incorporates stormwater drainage and just a really cool new example where they think this runs 8 or 10 blocks. And the cross streets are regular streets, and then this long one is this pedestrian thoroughfare. This is one in Strasbourg, France, that actually Jim and I both have seen firsthand, and I did not actually take any photos of it, which I regret. But Google Street View was able to give me a view, kind of the before and after. Prior to the project, it was a one-way street that had a very narrow sidewalk with on-street parking. They ripped that out and put in this pedestrian promenade that's controlled with hydraulic bollards. And I stayed at a hotel on this road, and we had to come to the bollard, push the button, They lowered the thing and let us drive, and I've never gone like 3 kilometers an hour with whiter knuckles, when bikes and cars and people are just surrounding your vehicle that you're trying to drive down the road. So anyway, that was another good example. And then just this November, I was visiting friends in Germany who live in this town, Dettingen, and this is in the little center of this village, and it's, you know, you've got clearly delineated marks at the entrance that, hey, you're entering a pedestrian street, but you are allowed to drive down this street at all times of day unless there's an event where it gets blocked off. But yeah, this is just a handful of examples. So the commercial area, the aerial photo on the left shows where the commercial development is going to be. The photo on the right, you can see this road that kind of bisects it from left to right. This is the Wunert, with really only the upper portion of it being this shared space. They proposed 20,000 square feet of retail, and right now we're looking at building permits for the, I think it's the bottom corner here, maybe number 4, is that right, Jim? And then I think number 8 are the 3 buildings that they're looking to develop first. And I expect that these building permits will issue sometime this year. And it's probably a 12 to 18 month construction project to complete these. These are some renderings. They did a 3D walkthrough of what this is going to look like in the future. And so this is this Wunert concept looking from the main collector going through the residential neighborhood. So this is where we'll go back 2 slides, or a slide. This is taken from this intersection looking down the Wunert, and the residential units would be behind you here. The photo on the right is just looking on that same Wunert in the opposite direction from where the parking area will be, which is kind of down at the corner of Euro and corner of the Drive. So a couple more renderings. These are pedestrian. These are exclusively pedestrian streets serving the commercial development. So cars won't be driving in these areas, but these are just for people. Again, the total layout is kind of shown in the concept drawing on the right. Those are the unit counts and the breakdown of what units are currently proposed, which some of this is subject to change because the western half of the development is still in the permitting process. The single family units that are being built, we've got 119 homes. Each of them has an alley loaded ADU. And so 2 parking stalls for 2 units, so one per building, but there is on-street parking in the neighborhood, which then is shared, and so people who have more vehicles will be parking on the street. And then this is a photo I took today, actually. I tried to go get some updated photos now that they have sided windows on these buildings. This is the star indicates where I took this photo from, looking kind of to the southwest. And these were slightly older photos from a number of weeks ago, and just show what's being built in the scale of things. And then this is a photo of the residential Wunert. The first one has gone in here. There's one house that's oriented to the side, and then the rest of the units on this will have garages or fronts of houses that face onto this little residential Wunert that is the shared street. If our fire code allowed it, we would have added additional features here, like kind of making cars so that they have to meander a little bit more through the road. But the fire code insists on 20 feet clear, no exceptions, and that's something that, you know, there's actually a law in the legislature right now, where the legislature is trying to make it possible to do more shared streets. But I think that there's some things that need to be reconciled between fire code. Like maybe it's okay, a fire truck is 10 feet wide. Maybe it's okay if the entrance to a pedestrian street is narrow to slow people down when they're coming into it. And then as long as you still have room to have pullouts inside of the street, that's okay, rather than having this continuous 20 feet so that 2 fire trucks can pass each other anywhere along the entire road. I think we've got to be a little bit smarter about it and try to keep the cost of development down, make things more walkable, achieve better densities, et cetera. And so, you know, we are looking to post lower speed limits. The change in state law that's actually proposed allows us to set speed limits. Right now, it's proposed at 10 miles an hour. The Swedish design manual actually says it should be between 3 and 6 miles an hour, 5 to 10 kilometers per hour. And so I've commented to the legislature saying, hey, we really ought to put this at 5 kilometers per hour, because the cars are supposed to be going no faster than the people walking on the street. And because the streets are supposed to be limited in how long they are, you're not talking about really long stretches with a low speed limit. It's usually going to be like 300 to 900 feet of road where you would have to drive very slowly. And then once you're off of that road, you're onto a normal road with a speed limit. So, and just so you know, we do have, that 3D walkthrough on our website, and you're welcome to, you just like Google Maps, you can navigate around and look at what the McCormick Village is gonna look like, so.
Yeah, thanks for throwing that together so fast. That was great.
So any questions about that, I guess, before I go,
Yeah, a couple of observations. It is looking good out there. They're doing a good job. We have problems with speed in McCormick Woods a lot. And there's only so many policemen around. Enforcing any kind of low speed limit is gonna be interesting for the police. How much input has the police department had into this development with respect to speed patrols and those things?
well, I mean, the police department doesn't really get involved in development review, they do get involved when we're setting speed limits and setting design standards for roads, I suppose, to some degree, but, ultimately, that's a matter of budget, and unfortunately, McCormick Woods Drive was designed as a racetrack, I mean, it's, I think there are racetracks that are narrower than that cars are doing 120 miles an hour on, so, without vertical curbs or traffic calming, that's just what's going to happen, and it's, that's what the developer was allowed to do by Kitsap County back in the day, and, I don't know where anybody.
Yeah, it's not just McCormick Woods Drive.
Yeah.
All the arterials have problems, honestly.
Yeah.
But again, I just want to make sure that I was just curious how the police were involved with that, because you're gonna see issues with that slow speed. And then,
Yeah.
next question I had too is, we have a golf cart ordinance out there for the main part of McCormick Woods. The two big pieces there in the west. Is there any thought of connecting golf cart access to the villages? Overall?
Yes, there is. I think that, there's a large. Let me click on another map here, I'll share my screen and.
I get that question a lot, that's why I'm passing it on to you.
With the track and the mouse. So in McCormick Woods, this is the Kitsap parcel search at the new roundabout, which is here. This large parcel is one of the only unentitled pieces of property out there. And so McCormick is interested at some point maybe in doing a similar concept to what they've done on the north side of the road on the south side. I think if and when that goes, we're either going to create golf cart parking where people who want to take a golf cart to this area can stop and use the crosswalk to get to the village, so we're not having golf carts on Old Clifton Road. I don't think there's anything that precludes us from having golf carts on Old Clifton Road, but I worry about the speed limits. Even in the roundabout, I think that, you know, that's, you know, maybe a concern with having a crossing of McCormick, Old Clifton Road. So I think we're gonna at least have a place maybe for people to be able to leave their golf cart somewhere. If not, drive all the way to the north side of the road and have the golf cart zone extend into the village. I think the people in the village probably would, at least in the part that I just gave you the presentation on, aren't gonna have a place to store a golf cart. So it probably wouldn't benefit them as much as it
That's
does.
the homeowners that are asking. Sure. Thank you, that's great.
Yeah, and as far as speed limits in the village, the roads are designed with on-street parking. The roads are as narrow as they're allowed to be. That on-street parking, the bulb outs that are in place, we have a lot of traffic calming measures there that don't exist in any part of McCormick Woods, even the newer parts, because it is meant to be this pedestrianized area. So I think speeding will be mitigated significantly just by the design of the roads there.
Thank you. And great presentation, appreciate it.
I just wanted to add on, that I think it's really cool to have McCormick Village as like a proof of concept for, this winners. I think it's great that we're doing this, to be able to show how effective they are. In terms of speeding, that on the Commissioner Wright's, comment, yeah, it's an issue all over Blue Orchard. It's been, and I find that through my limited education, albeit, but, that speeding is more related to the design of the road itself rather than the police presence. For example, across the Lund Avenue Bridge, the speed limit posted there is 35 miles an hour, and I have yet to see a single car in my 27 years of life ever go 35 miles an hour across that road. It is always speeding as fast as they can across the road, simply by virtue of the fact that it's a 4-lane road.
I guess you've never seen
Nevertheless, you know, with more narrow roads like you find in, for example, up here in the hill and Sydney, that those being more narrow roads, you find people naturally are slowing themselves down without having to have these present there. So I think more just being there were more pedestrians in the road, if you had to look out for bicycles, if you had to look out for golf carts, for example. You find that people naturally slow themselves down, you don't need to lose presence as much. So it's good to have a proof of concept in the Mormon Village. Quick question, this is like way off projection in the future. Would there be potential of conversion of current residential streets, in different parts of Porter? Who more interested, that's, what's the potential of that?
Well, I think public streets, there's no money to do something like that. I mean, maybe you could get a one-off grant to do a block of that type of street. But one of the design principles for the MRF is that there should be more pedestrian traffic than vehicle traffic, or at least equal pedestrian and vehicle traffic. And if it's a vehicle road, that has sometimes people walk, that is not an appropriate pitch for this tool. This is really meant to be in these places where there's we have a park, we have a commercial area, and we have very compact houses in close proximity, and so it makes things, it makes people say, you know what, there's not a lot of parking down there, I'm going to walk because it's just easier than driving for a parking spot. That's an appropriate use of the tool, but just putting it off in some other area of the city is not the right tool for that application. There is another concept that we're looking at called yield street, which what they do is they take 20 feet of asphalt, but they stripe a single lane on the road. And so there are bike lanes striped on both sides. And so the cars are actually encouraged to drive essentially head on, and then they use the bike lanes when they go around one another. And so it's a way to confine the road and make people, it changes behavior a little bit. There's actually a great example of that in Victoria that I just saw, and you guys will humor me on, I will show you.
I think you should take us on some of these field trips so we can see these things firsthand.
If I had the budget for it, that would be fantastic.
Is that why you want to go to Victoria?
All the planning commission retreat.
Right? I mean, we do all this for free.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. So this is like right near downtown Victoria, near Deacon Chris, which you can see this street has been striped so that there's a single lane down the middle. And there are bike lanes, and this one actually has on-street parking. But there's also more rural applications of this model where right on the edge of the outer lane, you're onto the landscape. And so they're encouraging people to use the middle of the road. And when they come to another car, you merge to the side, but this allows bike lanes and kind of causes cars to behave a little bit differently. And so this is Port Townsend, I think, just put one of these in. And I know our city engineer, Chris Hammer, is really interested in using this as a cost-effective way to get bike lanes into areas without having to widen the roads or add significant costs. And so there are certain applications where this may be appropriate, even in areas that aren't anywhere near as urban as what you see here in Victoria.
Yeah, like, that's certainly a good alternative, so the only, where I was thinking of them being applicable, would be in places that are disconnected from the main thoroughfares, that are still residential areas, because it's not just for transportation purposes, I'm thinking, but also like kids playing, different areas around parks, and just having a street design where it forces cars to slow down, like, I think that'd be beneficial, even in places that are already built up and developed in Porter trees. That's a good word. This is March. We're getting the problem. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for the condition. We might have a question for you.